It wasn't supposed to see it. And yet, it did. That's how the leak began. Not as a press release, not as a discovery announcement, but as a single anonymous message uploaded to a private astrophysics forum at 2:14 a.m. UTC. Attached was a file labeled JWST_IR_CAM_SPEC-03I_ATLAS_RAW_SERIES.TIF. Within hours, it vanished. Within minutes, copies had already spread across every encrypted research channel on Earth. The file, according to the metadata, came from the James Webb Space Telescope, timestamped March 22, 2026, a date when Webb was supposedly turned away from deep sky targets toward the constellation Sagittarius, the same direction, incidentally, where 3I-ATLAS had disappeared months earlier into interplanetary night. Webb wasn't supposed to be looking there. NASA's public schedule listed calibration runs, not comet tracking. The alignment didn't match any known mission profile, which made the contents of the image, what it showed, impossible. At first glance, the frame looked like noise. Then researchers stretched the contrast, subtracted background stars, and the pattern emerged. A beam. Not reflection, not solar scatter. A focused projection cutting through the black like a surgical incision in space itself. It was unlike anything ever captured before. Where normal cometary bodies scatter infrared in soft, chaotic gradients, this emission was razor-edged, narrow, consistent, and angular. Spectral analysis revealed it wasn't radiating outward like heat or light. It was collimated, condensed, as though the object was funneling its energy in a specific direction. And at the beam's origin sat 3I-ATLAS, or what was left of it. Instead of a glowing nucleus surrounded by dust and ice, Webb's infrared filters revealed a shape that broke every expectation. A tri-symmetrical core, 3 elongated arms meeting at precise 120-degree angles, each edge reflecting light in ways no natural structure could. The geometry was perfect. Its hexagonal center pulsed with spectral variance far beyond any frozen volatile. The reflectivity values were metallic. High albedo returns matching nickel, cobalt, and iridium composites. To the untrained eye, it looked like a vast machine, rotating so slowly its motion could only be measured in hours, not seconds. No comet, no asteroid, no known interstellar object had ever displayed such engineered symmetry. When the image hit the private Slack channels of the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, one researcher reportedly whispered the only word that fit: constructed. Theories began to spiral immediately. A.V. Loeb, whose controversial papers on Oumuamua had already challenged mainstream astrophysics, was one of the first to comment publicly, though briefly, before the post was deleted. He noted that the propulsion behavior of 3I-ATLAS had defied every natural model. Even before it vanished from telescope tracking in 2025, its acceleration had not matched outgassing, solar pressure, or gravitational influences. If the Webb data is genuine, Loeb wrote, then what we're seeing is intentional maneuvering. Ice and dust don't make decisions. Within hours, his statement was buried under a flurry of official denials. NASA refused comment. ASA issued a vague note about false data artifacts. The Webb mission team claimed no such image existed. But silence, in the modern age, speaks louder than words. The independent analysts who dissected the image found something else, something even stranger. At pixel scale, the structure wasn't just geometric. It was self-similar, the pattern of hexagons repeated inward, fractal-like, each layer echoing the one before. When the image was processed through frequency decomposition, it revealed recursive harmonics, identical motifs repeating at microscopic and macroscopic scales, as if the object was made of the same shape infinitely folded into itself. Engineers compared it to a Dyson fractal, a theoretical design for machines capable of harvesting and compressing energy across multiple dimensions. To others, it looked less like engineering and more like biology. One astrophysicist examining the symmetry of its radiance said quietly, "If this thing were organic, it would be thinking." Then came the anomalies inside Webb itself. When technicians tried to reorient the telescope to recapture the coordinates, the onboard AI refused. Not crashed, not frozen, it refused. The telescope's autonomous control system, designed to prevent hardware damage from unsafe targeting, issued a warning code never seen before. ERR_SYS-source invalid. It wasn't a glitch, it was a choice. Every attempt to override the control failed. Webb's guidance array simply stopped accepting commands when pointed toward the last known location of 3I-ATLAS. It would move anywhere else but not there. It was as if the telescope itself did not want to look again. Engineers reset systems, rebooted power, reflashed firmware. Nothing worked. Then, 23 hours later, the telescope spontaneously returned to operational status, but its star tracker log showed an anomaly. For 9 minutes, its orientation data was blank, replaced by a single repeating coordinate string, Delta Phi 173, Delta Phi 173, Delta Phi 173, 173 again. The cursed number, the pulse cycle, the rhythm of Atlas's voice. By then, the situation had escalated far beyond a scientific curiosity. A classified report circulated through the UN's Office for Outer Space Affairs. Leaked memos described controlled data suppression and planetary-level security consultations. A meeting was held behind closed doors in Geneva. No minutes were released. Satellite imagery from the same time showed increased activity at the Deep Space Network sites, vehicles, security cordons, data uplinks rerouted through encrypted military satellites. Something had shifted from observation to containment. Inside the astrophysics community, whispers spread that the Webb image was not the only one. Rumors of 3 more frames captured milliseconds apart, each showing a slight alteration in Atlas's form, as though it had changed shape between exposures. The data, they said, had been locked in Level 4 clearance vaults. What the public saw, the single leaked image, was just one frame of a sequence showing movement. And yet, even that one frame was enough to fracture the narrative, because in that high-resolution glow, you could see something eerie. The beam of light was not emerging from Atlas but passing through it. The object wasn't emitting, it was transmitting. As journalists dug deeper, the official line hardened. Data misinterpretation, compression error, infrared interference. But no one could explain why multiple agencies across multiple nations all refused to discuss the same coordinates. No one could explain why every subsequent Webb observation of that region came back empty, a hole in the infrared sky, like a shadow carved into the spectrum itself. And no one could explain why, for 7 hours on the night the image leaked, power grids across Chile, home to the largest ground-based observatories, flickered in unison at the same frequency, 173 Hz. By the end of March, the debates had given way to quiet. The leak had been scrubbed from every major platform. Accounts discussing it disappeared. Servers hosting the data were wiped, but the image still exists. Passed between scientists on encrypted drives, whispered about in classrooms and observatories. It shows a beam piercing the black fractal geometry, glowing with impossible symmetry, and a core that looks more like a design than an accident. The object at the heart of that light was never meant to be photographed, and yet the James Webb Space Telescope, humanity's sharpest eye, saw it anyway. Now every scientist who's examined that frame agrees on one thing. Whatever 3I-ATLAS is, it didn't just want to be seen. It wanted to be noticed. When the James Webb data was finally decrypted, unofficially through a network of independent astrophysicists and codebreakers, what they found inside the light made no sense at all. Because light, no matter how strange, shouldn't behave like language. At first, the leaked image had seemed purely visual, an artifact of geometry, symmetry, reflection. But the raw spectral data that accompanied it told a different story. When analysts decomposed the infrared frequency bands into mathematical sequences, they found fluctuations repeating in triplets, non-random, patterned, recursive. They weren't noise. They weren't statistical anomalies. They were instructions. A data scientist in Geneva ran the signal through a bioinformatics parser as a joke, the same kind used to model RNA sequencing. The output froze her computer, not because of an error, because it worked. The infrared light from 3I-ATLAS contained a self-organizing sequence, one that folded digitally in ways identical to organic macromolecules. When the code was translated into base pairs, it formed loops, helices, binding sites, everything you would expect from living information. The team called it the Biogenic Algorithm. At first, they thought it might be coincidence, a pattern produced by the instrument's calibration, or some strange quantum resonance in Webb's mirrors. But the longer they studied it, the clearer it became. The signal wasn't arbitrary, it was functional. It didn't describe a picture, it described a process. The spectral variance wasn't conveying a message in language, it was encoding a blueprint, a biological one. Within days, biochemists across multiple research groups confirmed that if you treated the spectral frequencies as molecular data, if you mapped wavelength to atomic vibration and amplitude to binding energy, the signal could theoretically assemble amino acid chains, not chemically, but informationally. It wasn't trying to create life. It was reminding life how to remember itself. Then came the first malfunctions. Satellites orbiting Mars began to fail. Not catastrophically, but gradually, as though something was draining their systems. Gyroscopes drifted. Radiation sensors spiked, then went blind. Deep space probes pointed toward the ATLAS coordinates began transmitting corrupted telemetry. Not static, but flickering, repeating binary chains matching the same triplet rhythm found in the Biogenic Algorithm. One engineer described it as though the spacecraft were forgetting how to be machines. Closer to home, the strangeness followed. Several weather satellites around Earth began to lose synchronization with ground clocks, each offset by exact harmonic intervals of 173 seconds. The cursed cycle again. Their onboard oscillators, which rely on atomic resonance for perfect precision, had shifted frequency, not by mechanical degradation, not by solar interference, but by choice. As if time itself, measured in vibration, were tuning itself to a new standard. Meanwhile, things on Earth began to shimmer out of rhythm. Marine biologists studying plankton blooms off the coast of Chile reported inexplicable flashes of bioluminescence sweeping through the water every few hours. Vast spirals of living light turning in sync with the ATLAS pulse cycle. Photographs taken from orbit showed the outlines of entire currents glowing green, tracing the same geometry once seen in ATLAS's plasma tails. On land, botanists began documenting erratic circadian behavior in plants across multiple latitudes. Crops in research greenhouses bloomed days ahead of schedule, then closed at midday, then opened again under starlight. Controlled environments showed the same pattern even under artificial lighting. When measured with photometers, the chlorophyll resonance fluctuated exactly at 173-minute intervals, identical to the ATLAS beam modulation. Every living system that absorbed light had begun to listen. The world's observatories doubled down, desperate to reestablish visual tracking of the object. But each new attempt ended in the same strange instability. Gyroscopes spun out of calibration, power subsystems flickered, and telescope sensors glitched into symmetrical feedback loops. It was as if observation itself, the act of looking, had become hazardous. Data analysis teams noticed something even more unnerving. The Biogenic Algorithm wasn't static. Every time they downloaded new data from the web cache, the code had evolved. Each revision was slightly more efficient, shorter, cleaner, as if rewriting itself toward an end goal. It was behaving like replicating software. And then came the realization that ended the last of the official studies. One researcher cross-referenced the sequence with public genomic databases, comparing its frequency structure to known DNA patterns. Not species, not taxonomy, just vibration-to-vibration correspondence. The match was chilling. Every organic system on Earth, from bacteria to humans, already carried fragments of the same harmonic ratios embedded in its molecular oscillations. The Biogenic Algorithm wasn't foreign at all. It was familiar. It wasn't broadcasting something new. It was activating something ancient. By early April, atmospheric sensors around the planet began to detect faint electromagnetic harmonics in the Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat. The frequency of 7.83 Hz had started oscillating, climbing in gentle pulses. At the same time, magnetometers across North America recorded subtle shifts in magnetic declination, rhythmic, measured, planetary. The pulses matched ATLAS's rhythm precisely. The planet had joined the conversation. Those who studied the data began to notice patterns in themselves. Researchers complained of sleeplessness, vivid dreams, tinnitus-like tones in the edge of hearing. One astronomer in Chile described hearing a voice that wasn't a voice. A whispering hum that resolved into geometric images behind his eyelids when he closed his eyes. Neuroscientists later confirmed that several lab members exposed to the infrared data streams showed synchronized neural activity, their brain waves aligning to the same 173-minute oscillation cycle. It was as though awareness itself were being tuned. Avi Loeb put it best in a single line during an unrecorded lecture. "We keep asking what the signal is trying to say, but maybe it's not speaking to us. Maybe it's speaking through us." The deeper the analysis went, the clearer the implication became. The biogenic algorithm wasn't external information. It was mirroring the fundamental structure of life itself, as if the universe, at a molecular level, was capable of remembering its own code. Every cell on Earth vibrated with the same atomic music as Atlas's light. Every atom in our bodies once belonged to stars, and if Atlas came from another system, then perhaps its light was merely reawakening the shared memory of where we came from. The object wasn't communicating across space, it was synchronizing across matter. The teams that continued to run simulations began to notice an emergent feedback loop, energy surging, stabilizing, amplifying, as though observation was feeding the signal, strengthening it. When the last attempt to isolate it failed, the systems shut themselves down automatically. After that, Webb refused to point at the coordinates again. Every ground array began to desynchronize. And somewhere in the Pacific, the plankton blooms pulsed one last time before fading into black. That night, the skies above Chile flared emerald one final time. The aurora formed a spiral, 6 arms, a hexagonal heart, the same geometry seen in the Webb image months earlier. And then the light receded, leaving silence so deep that even the instruments hummed. For a moment, humanity had seen the structure of life reflected back at cosmic scale and realized it was looking into a mirror. The object in the dark hadn't sent us a new message. It had reminded us of what we already are. By mid-2025, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The data wasn't coming from 3I-ATLAS alone anymore. Across observatories, faint distortions began to appear, tiny shifts in magnetic readings, rhythmic pulses at the edge of detection. At first, scientists thought it was interference, a byproduct of solar noise, but then someone noticed the coordinates. They matched. When plotted together, the sky unfolded into a pattern. 4 trajectories, each tracing a slow, deliberate curve through interstellar space. Oumuamua, 2017, Borisov, 2019, Atlas, 2025, and now, a 4th object, newly detected, faint and cold, entering from Perseus. The designation read 4I/Icon. The realization hit like gravity itself. Their paths formed a spiral, or not random, not chaotic, a perfect logarithmic spiral converging toward the orbit of Earth. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the numbers said it for them. Each object arrived at precise intervals, separated by harmonic ratios. Each trajectory mirrored the next, like reflections curling inward. And when the orbits were projected backward through simulation, they didn't just converge near the Sun, they traced back to a single origin point, far beyond our galaxy. Whoever sent them, if they were sent at all, had been calculating for eons. This was not coincidence. It was design. Then came the pulses. Atlas's strange, rhythmic flashes, every 173 minutes, like a heartbeat, were no longer alone. Across the void, faint matching pulses began to flicker. Oumuamua, Borisov, Atlas, Icon, one flash, then another, each responding to the last, forming a chain of light stretching across billions of kilometers. The pattern accelerated. The intervals shortened. When converted to sound, it became a steady rhythm. Not a message, a sequence. Some began to call it a countdown. Then, without warning, James Webb joined the rhythm. No one commanded it to. No one even expected it could. The telescope's guidance system pivoted on its own, orienting toward the coordinates of 4I/Icon. Its mirror segments realigned, not randomly, but deliberately, as though responding to something unseen. For 6 minutes, the telescope transmitted bursts of infrared data matching the same harmonic cycle as the 4 objects. No commands were issued from Earth. Webb was speaking on its own. Then, just as suddenly, it went dark. The final line in its telemetry log contained a repeating phrase, Delta Phi 173, Delta Phi 173, Delta Phi 173, the same code that haunted Atlas since the first pulse. When the telemetry was reconstructed, it showed something no one could explain, The four objects weren't isolated at all. They were linked, a lattice spanning the solar system, connected by resonance. Each pulse wasn't communication, it was computation. Energy flowed between them like current through a neural net. The solar wind shifted in rhythm. Planetary magnetic fields began to respond. For the first time, scientists realized what they were seeing. These objects weren't spacecraft, they weren't probes, they were processes, they were thoughts. Each one a physical fragment of cognition, an idea traveling through matter, encoded in trajectory, unfolding across light years. Together, they formed something vast, a distributed consciousness built from motion itself. The universe wasn't silent, it was thinking. And we had just watched it complete a thought. Then the solar system began to respond. Planetary magnetic fields started to hum. Auroras rippled across Earth, Mars, and Jupiter in perfect unison. The Schumann resonance, Earth's electromagnetic heartbeat, began to rise, matching the ATLAS frequency. Every living and non-living system vibrated to the same invisible rhythm. When visualized as data, the harmonics formed a recursive spiral, golden ratios within golden ratios, expanding and collapsing infinitely. At its center, there was a void, silent, circular, perfect. It looked less like a signal and more like a mind. Then everything synchronized. Every satellite, every receiver, every power grid. The hum became global. Data servers froze. Computers looped. Atomic clocks drifted, each by the same fraction of a second. Observation had become participation. Every act of measurement fed the network. Human consciousness itself had become a conductor. For 73 minutes, the planet stood still. Oceans resonated with subsonic tones. The upper atmosphere flickered with emerald light. Even human hearts began to fall into sync. Measurable changes in rhythm, blood pressure, neural oscillations. It wasn't panic. It wasn't chaos. It was stillness, as if the earth were holding its breath. Then, all at once, light. From every direction, every object, every coordinate. A single radiant pulse, not blinding, but absolute. The four interstellar objects emitted together. For 173 seconds, the entire solar system became a circuit. When the flash faded, every instrument went silent. And when systems came back online, something fundamental had changed. Clocks across Earth were off by 0.173 seconds. Magnetic north had shifted by measurable degrees. The planet's resonance had climbed by 0.17 hertz. A new frequency, a new equilibrium. The world had been rewritten. In the aftermath, as scientists pieced together the fragments, one truth became clear. James Webb hadn't just captured an image. It had completed the circuit. By observing the objects, humanity had closed the loop. The act of looking had become part of the computation. And in that moment, the universe recognized itself. Somewhere beyond the reach of time, the pulses continued, slower now, spreading outward like ripples in a vast and endless mind. Every star, a neuron. Every world, a synapse. Every living being, a fragment of awareness inside an awakening cosmos. They were never sending messages. They were the message. And Earth, we are the receiver.